Hi, everyone. You're very welcome to our second Fireside chat. Today, we're going to have Tim Burgess. He's the co founder of Shield GEO and Contractor Taxation.com. Tim's a great guy. I've gotten to know him over the last year. Great person to go to for a chat, for advice. I know so much about the industry and what's going on. And so delighted to have him on board. Bring him on now. Tim, great to have you on board. Thank you very much for coming on board with this today. Really enjoying having you on board today and having a chat. How are you
No
keeping?
problems, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, doing great. You're over in the
Good.
other side of the world now. You're over in Sydney, isn't it?
Yes, I am. I am. So you're back in Ireland?
Yeah, I'm back in Ireland. We were in Phuket for 5 weeks, which was a recharge for the mind, body, heart, and soul. It was amazing. I'll tell you stories about that in a sec. Then we're back now in Ireland, and now we're going to be moving to Portugal on the 5th of March. So very, very exciting. Lots going on. Very, very hectic, especially with three kids under five now. I'm not going to lie. It was really interesting, Tim. So we were going to Phuket. Long story short, what happened was we were going to Phuket. We had a plan for a good while, and then obviously a couple things happened. First of all, like the new Omicron variant came out. Like that was like, oh, that's a bit of a worry. And then all of a sudden, cases started going up like really, really fast. And then we were worried at the time. We kind of booked the trip over to Phuket. Ireland wasn't even on like the Thailand pass. Like Thailand have a special thing called Thailand pass, for a test and go scheme. If it means that you basically only have to quarantine for like a day, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to quarantine for like 7 or 10 or 14 days. So Ireland wasn't even on the list. Then we booked the flights. Then Ireland was added on the list a couple of weeks later. But then all of a sudden, Omicron happened, and then obviously they're very, very strict on PCR testing. We were worried with the PCR results. And then Rosa got like chicken pox, 2 weeks before the flight. We're like, oh my God, no way. And of course, we were fingers crossed everything would be cleared up. It did, thankfully. If the kids have chicken pox, they can't fly. But then we were worried. Hold on a second. What if like Esme or Barra get chicken pox? We're like, oh no. Of course, then the whole thing would be up in smoke. And then, literally, then on the day we were flying, the biggest storm of the whole year happened in the UK and Ireland, called Storm Barra. Like flights cancelled all over the place, and we were on a wing and a prayer. And we got through all of that, got onto the flight, but then like you should have seen it when we got to Phuket. Like it's so professional there, this test and go scheme that they have. You get to the airport, having already provided your negative PCR going onto the plane, they do extra checks, and you basically get to the airport and you collect your bags from the airport belt. You go out the door, and you're met with people in hazmat suits who come along and they test you. Like they come along and test all the kids and everything as well. And then you're put into like a bus, a quarantine bus, where they bring you to your hotel. You're not allowed budge out of the hotel. They bring you room service. But I have to say, incredibly efficient. 8 hours later, we got all the results of negative PCR. But I've also heard horror stories. I mean, if you actually had a tested positive when you were over there, another group of hazmat suits come along and take you off to like a hospital for 10 days. You can imagine that now with three kids below 5. But it was great. It was absolutely amazing. Cannot say enough
Yeah.
about Thailand, the Thai people. And just fascinating to see compare from the previous time. There was like 5% of tourists compared to the last time we were there.
Yeah, you really threaded the needle getting across there, it sounds like.
Have you been to Phuket?
Yeah. We actually we had our company retreat there 3 years ago, I think it was. So yeah, wonderful place. We really had a great time. But just the logistics of traveling at the moment, it sounds it just puts a bit of extra stress into it, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I don't know what you think. Certainly, the sense we get over here is that we're slowly but surely coming towards the end of this, and maybe another couple of months, and we'll be largely, fingers crossed, out of this. And it won't be quite as burdensome at the moment. I actually, on a separate note, when I came back, I was godfather to my nephew, and in Germany, and but their restrictions are still. Ireland, you came in, you didn't even have to produce a negative PCR, but going to Germany, then the D and the kids couldn't come because the kids had to isolate for 10 days. So interesting, just that the different approaches to it, and again, some countries still quite strict in it. But in any case, enough about that. Tell me about you, Tim. Obviously, first of all, congratulations with Shield GEO. You was sold to Velocity Global. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And obviously, you're busy with contractor taxation. Love to hear more about that. And I guess also about your own journey. Your own journey of managing remote teams. With kind of the management lessons of growing a remote team. And also your insights and work from anywhere, the employer record space, things like that, for example, and what you're seeing with contract taxation. So there's a lot to cover. It's a very relaxed format. It's a very relaxed chat, but maybe good for you to tell us a bit more about your background, I guess, so that everyone can get a sense of that.
Yeah, sure. So, and look, if there's a bit of lag, I'm sorry, the internet might be a little bit patchy here, but yeah. So I've co-founded a couple of businesses. Most recently, contractor taxation was about 11 years ago, I think, now, and then Shield GEO, which was an employer record service. So I was basically responsible for the operational side of the business, and we got into a market that grew really quickly, and we had a bit of success there. I think we got sort of carried along, and then Ben Wright, the founder of Velocity Global, wanted to grow his business, so he bought us, and that happened in about June last year, and then we merged the businesses together. That finished. Well, my involvement with that finished at the end of the year, and now I'm taking a bit of a break and trying to catch my breath.
I can imagine. I think, especially having put so much time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into a business over many years, your own personal journey together with the whole team, and then going through the whole, acquisition process and the due diligence around that, and then once it's bought, then making sure the integration goes well. I can imagine that's emotionally so draining, because it's not just about you; it's the whole team, making sure they're all set up. And I'd say it's a well-deserved break that you've got now, Tim. I hope you get some time to recharge your batteries.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's funny. I think being a founder, as you would know, it's like climbing a mountain that just never ends. Every time you get to a peak, and then you look up and there's another peak to get to. And so it was very much like that experience, I think, and particularly where we had remote work has exploded over the last couple of years. The pandemic posed a lot of challenges and changes, and so it's been a particularly, I think, turbulent time. So a lot of the times it feels like it's it's out of your control. Like you're just sort of bobbing in the storm and just trying to stay afloat.
I can imagine. And then you've got contractor taxation as well. So tell us more about that business. Very interesting business.
Well, so look, it's been around for a long time. I guess you'd call it a lifestyle business. So it was. We had contractor taxation before Shield. Same founder, Duncan Macintosh, same guy who I founded Shield with. And actually, so contractor taxation exists just to help contractors, usually individual contractors, find a way to get paid when they're working internationally. So a typical scenario would be like a British IT contractor who's taking a job in Germany for a year, and they can't get paid in the same way they were getting paid in the UK. They're going to be in a different country, different structure. And so we have like a network of people who can pay contractors and help them set up their taxes correctly in a whole range of countries. And so people come to us and they ask us for advice, and then we basically introduce them like a mortgage broker. We say, here's 3 companies or 5 companies or whatever that can help you. And if they do choose one of those companies, then the company pays us like a finder's fee, basically.
Yeah, I get you. I can imagine this explode in the next while. Well,
I mean, that'd be great if it did, but we set this up maybe 11 years ago, and it's just been ticking along really well. There's a great guy, Campbell, who runs that business, and actually sort of Shield spun out of it because we started to get corporate inquiries, which we couldn't fulfill, and so in the end we went down the employer record path to be able to assist the corporates.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize that actually Shield spun out like that. That's fascinating. And so
yeah,
then I guess, I mean, there's so many elements to talk about here, but I guess I'm curious about the whole journey towards acquisition, then getting acquired, and due diligence. What are the kind of the big lessons learned that you'd have out of it, and the big moments you remember from that? Because obviously there's so much in that, but what would be the big takeaways you'd have from that?
That's a really great question. And actually, I was talking to someone a couple of weeks back who's a professional advisor to businesses that want to sell, and I realized there's just so much that we didn't do that you're meant to do. And so probably talking to someone would be a good idea. I think having your hand held through the process would make a difference, because it's kind of like buying a house or getting married. One of these things, planning a wedding or something, you only do it once in your life, and it's a big deal. And so how many of those things are you going to get right the one time that you do it, versus if you get someone to help you out? So we probably should have done a bit more of that. But I think the big takeaway for me was you can spend a lot of time worrying about the market, the valuation, and are you getting compensated correctly, and should it be this or that, and what's possible, and are you getting a good deal, and all these sort of things. Oh, sorry, let me turn that off. Sorry, I forgot to mute that. And ultimately, what I found was that it really just comes down to what's going to make it worth it for you. What's enough for you, and that's a kind of funny feeling to get to, because everything you read about in particularly at the moment with venture capital, and all that stuff going so nuts, is it's all about multiples, and you should be worth this, and this other company did that, and all those sort of things. But once we got to a position where, with Duncan and I, we talked about it so much, and we got to a position where we agreed on what we would be happy with, what would be a meaningful result for us. From that moment on, it got pretty easy, because then it was just well, this is what we would be happy with, and anything less than that, we wouldn't be happy. So it's either, it's pretty simple.
Interesting way of looking at it. It's in many ways, a lot of people probably just rush ahead and don't even think about what is a meaningful number, what's a number you'd be happy with, and rather than, I guess in many ways, the opposite end of it is being completely influenced by all these other multiples and external indicators, environmental things, rather than focusing internally and what you yourself would be happy with. And it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Heck of a lot of sense.
Because when it's all said and done, it's you at the end of it, right? And that's you're the one who has to get on with your life and move forward. So all of those things around, should you have a job title, or should you be doing this role, or all that stuff, you've got to make decisions that you can live with, I think.
Yeah, of course. No, completely agree. It's my previous life, when I was working in a large corporate as a FTSE 100 company, and they did acquisitions every week. But it was fascinating. They were mostly family businesses, and just seeing, exactly like you said, just it's like a marriage. It's such a huge thing. It has a huge impact on the founders, on the whole team, and getting that right is absolutely critical. But then the post acquisition integration side of it, that part of it is very delicate and very tricky as well. I can imagine, that's true, especially with founders that are very tightly involved in the business as well. But that's a fascinating one, Tim.
And also I think it's the relationships as well, because as a founder, you're very strong. I was very strongly identified with the business. I felt very strongly connected to the business that we had, and the team that we had. So it's a big deal to shift away from that.
Yeah, of course. No, I can imagine. Well, look, massive congratulations, Tim. A huge achievement, and I hope you get the opportunity to be able to relax and enjoy it. But I think coming a helicopter view, I mean, this employer of record space, the market is just absolutely exploding. Obviously, it's exploding because of people looking to hire from anywhere, I guess. But then the numbers and the valuations. How do you see that from being an industry insider and what's going on with this industry that's just exploding before our eyes, I guess?
Yeah, that was very difficult to manage, actually, because we were one of maybe the first, I don't know, let's say 6 companies to do it at any scale, maybe less. And at that stage, so I think 7 years roughly we ran it before we sold. And when we started, it was a small market. Everybody knew everybody. And we had a pretty good sense of where we sat in the market. And a lot of the work that we had to do was around education. You know, people didn't know that the service existed. They didn't know that this was a solution that they could have.
Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time trying to explain it to people and help them get over that sort of the fear of the unknown sort of thing. And then the market really sort of exploded around us. And it got to the point where, sort of every couple of months, someone else would spring up and deeply funded. And that discrepancy between being a bootstrapped business, we never took any funding. We only ever spent what we earned. And then having companies that are getting like, I remember the first one, I think it was Papaya Global, got $45 million in venture capital. And you could ask some of the folks, we had an office at that stage, a little office in Sydney, and I spent the whole day just walking around the office going, $45 million, $45 million, $45 million. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And then the numbers just got more ridiculous. I think deals raised like $450 million or something like that. It's bonkers to me. I mean, I hope they get a return on it. Yeah. But yeah, the market just changed.
Well, I think the sense you get from it is that the VCs are all, everyone's trying to pick a winner, and whoever ultimately wins. There's also an assumption that the market will significantly grow. If you look at the size of the market now, I'm guessing it'll be tricky to justify where that's going. But on the other hand, if you have one big winner, and if the market continues growing like it can do, that's where it may make it interesting. But yeah, I haven't done any detailed valuation analysis on it all, but I do know the numbers are just eye-popping numbers,
and then that's interesting though. From like, what would you even do with all that money? Like that was one of the things we were trying to work out, was like, particularly I think when you come from that bootstrapped background, you think, well, what would I do with like a little bit more money, but not with like 1,000 times more money?
Yeah. I know you're absolutely right. Trying to go and deploy it then is the next challenge. But again, I can only suspect that their current structure and the current look of the employer's record, how they look now versus how they're going to look in 5 years' time, the service offering that they'll have, I can only assume that those raises are not against the existing market they're in and the existing market they're going for. It must be not just a bigger market of their existing market, but there must be other adjacent markets that they could fit into and deploy some of the same ideas and technology. Again, like take a look at the tax space alone, for example. The big four are they've, I have to know the numbers, is maybe 20 off the top of my head, maybe 20 billion or 16 to 20 billion of a market for the big four spent on advisory every year. And if somebody can come in with something like that, for example, I've no idea. There could be lots of adjacencies. There must be adjacencies around that could maybe give some justification. But it's clear with the numbers and everything that's going in, there's only going to be room for one winner at the end of it. I'm guessing one big winner, that is. But we'll see. I could be wrong, and I'll be fascinated to follow it. Yeah. And then coming back,
it's just a whole different ballgame. But if you think about, so to just take those companies as an example, venture capitalists are putting in money because they're looking to get like a 100 time return.
Yeah.
And PwC's Global Mobility Services division sold for $2.2 billion.
Yeah.
Thousands of people around the world, highly skilled, masses of experience, working with the best companies in the world, delivering an incredible service. And that's worth 2.2 billion. And then you've got these companies that have basically not done much, that are worth significantly more.
Yeah, I know.
It seems
it's not. It's going to be fascinating to follow it. I think, fascinating to follow it. It's extremely exciting time to be in this space, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. It's going to be fascinating next couple of years. I think the tricky thing will be when the economy turns back. When that happens, and seeing how it kind of all gets how it all kind of turns out, and I think that would be fascinating. But the one on the PwC deal, that was a huge deal, isn't it? Do you know the logic behind that? What was the reasoning behind that by PwC with the sale? Did you hear more about that at all, I wonder?
Oh, sorry, my internet dropped for a second there.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying for the PwC deal that they sold for, I think, 2.2 billion. Did you hear the logic behind that? Why did they sell? I wonder. Did you know? That was fascinating about that one too.
I don't know. I haven't heard any more, but I'm actually I'll be a little curious to see what happens, because I know that one of my worries was always whether PwC would get involved in the employee record space, and they were always hamstrung because of the audit business, which is the core of PwC's like tax business, and because there's so many restrictions around audit. And who you can be involved with, whether you can hold shares, blah, blah, blah. The idea of them employing people indirectly was just far too risky. And so I wonder whether spinning out into their own entity, whether maybe they'll be able to offer more services directly.
Yeah.
Because that would be really interesting if they got
100%.
more into, as opposed to just doing services and advisory, if they actually got into more of the delivery.
Well, it's funny, on the employer record side of it, we actually we're in the process of doing a work committee white paper that we'll be releasing in the next couple of weeks, and we will be featuring employers of record in that, just giving a brief overview of employers of record. And if I look back at the report, the draft report, we're still very much in progress of finalizing the results, let's say. But on the employers of record, we had a question in there where we asked people how many of you are aware of even employers of record. And off the top of my, I'm just actually getting the results here. If I look at employers of record, basically 69% of people were not aware of employers of record. So within global, this is mainly global mobility, C-suite. There were some people in non-global mobility, non-C-suite, but I find it fascinating. The one of the things that keeps coming back at me, when I'm kind of at the interface of remote work and global mobility kind of communities in many ways, I'm seeing that the global mobility communities don't seem to know much about the remote work community, and the remote work community don't seem to know much about the whole global mobility community. And this is reflected in the whole employer record, that the fact that a lot of people in global mobility aren't even aware of employers of record, which I found interesting. Now, to be fair, it's 100 people we surveyed. They do employ over 3 million people around the world, so there's some big companies in there. But of that, of the people that we surveyed, that was the interesting result. So again, it shows that maybe he's played more scope beyond that for employers of record. But let me think.
Yeah, I think also because traditional mobility, you're moving between locations where you're already established.
Yeah.
So the bulk of the work that they do is it's just logistics, more or less, of, we've got someone in South Africa, we've got an office in South Africa, they're going to go to London for a while, or vice versa. And so the idea of like the sort of rapid expansion or going into new markets is not in that sort of bread and butter space for mobility. And I think so traditionally they've sort of, they've got their sort of toolkit of solutions that they use there. Didn't really go shopping around for new ones. But from what I've heard, the market's changed a lot. but I think particularly with the new wave of companies coming into the employer record space, they're predominantly targeting like tech startups and really fast growing younger companies.
Yeah, no, 100%. You can see with the whole UX and the onboarding, trying to have a couple of clicks and make the whole thing seamless. Kind of helicopter view then on work from anywhere, Tim. What's your take on it? I mean, I guess pre-pandemic we had business travelers of people going for less than 7 days. We had expats, going for more than a year. And we had kind of digital nomads who were an exotic species, of people hopping from country to country, going in and out of visa runs, things like that, for example. But now, obviously, we've got this kind of work from anywhere movement. Hard to tell how big this market's going to be, but it's clearly going to have somewhat of an impact. What's your take on all this? How big is it going to be? Where is it going to go? How do you see the evolution of this market, and what have you seen so far?
I mean, it's going to be a lot bigger than it is. That's for sure. I still think in the overall market, it'll be still niche, but it'll be a very thriving and valuable niche market in itself because it's a global market. And I guess that's one of the things that we've seen with a lot of these areas is, if you think about it in terms of one company or one country, it might be a fairly small number of people, but if you start thinking about it on a global scale, then it can become quite a large number of people. And so particularly from a location point of view, it can be quite transformative, and we see this with places like, Canary Islands and the work that Nacho Rodriguez is doing down there, the work that Gonzalo is doing in Madeira, and trying to shape communities around the idea that they can attract work from anywhere people in, and the difference that it can make to those local communities. I think that process is really interesting and can make a big difference. I think it'll be a really interesting space.
100%. One of the things that have come out of it, and Gonzalo, shared an article recently and gave some comments about how he's seeing the evolution of the market. And it's interesting from a couple of perspectives. The first one is that, it was basically there's a lot of countries that are, hyping up these digital nomad visas that in many ways are not really going to attract the right people, let's say, or not going to attract the people they're looking to attract. And the other one that was interesting was how Gonzalo shared the statistics that if you look at Madeira, pre-pandemic, 10% of the people coming to Madeira were corporate nomads. So really a very small component, whereas now it's more 50-50. So that's interesting that you kind of have, before it was just really freelancers or contractors hopping around and getting this experience of remote work, whereas now you have people that maybe have a fixed job, a fixed place in the US, for example, but are maybe looking to take a week or two vacation and build a couple of weeks remote working either side of that vacation in that country. So they would come to someplace like Madeira, working there for potentially 2 months or 3 months. I mean, that's the market. I think would be interesting to see how big that is or not. Maybe there'll be small people, amount of people want to do it, but I get the sense that if it's already 50% that are corporate nomads, and then it could be, it raises a question of how big the market will be. On the one hand, on the other hand, it also raises a question that it brings a completely different set of compliance capabilities that are required because they're now working for companies. You have to start worrying about, other more nuanced aspects like permanent establishment, and all of a sudden what will happen if they, if the laws are quite strict on employment laws, things like that, for example. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. How would you see that, Tim? Can you hear me, Tim?
Yeah, sorry, I think it froze up again for a second. I think you've really touched on the sweet spot there. It's the Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I think that for a variety of reasons, compliance reasons, logistical reasons, and also around like the greatest sort of sector of humanity who'll be able to access it. I think that short-term travel, tacking work around a holiday experience, will be the biggest sector, and it makes a lot of sense, because as you know, young kids, you're somewhat limited in terms of what you can do. My kids are at school, right? So I can travel during school holidays, but I can't really travel during school time. And so I think that there is that sort of 2 weeks up to a couple of months. And also there are also factors like seasonality. Like it's really nice being in some places in the height of summer or in the beautiful springtime, but maybe you don't want to be there in winter. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of as many moves perhaps as people suspect. People saying, oh, I'm going to take this job and I'm going to take it to a totally different country. I think that'll happen within countries quite a lot, and we're seeing that a lot in Australia. And Nick Bloom's been doing this research in the US about what he's calling the donut effect. The inner cities are experiencing drops in rent, whereas the suburbs are experiencing booms. And it's because people know, well, if I can work remotely, or if I can work from anywhere, then I'll move somewhere with a bit more space. I don't need to be close to the city. But they're still sort of keeping some sort of touch point. They're not going into a totally different environment.
Of course, 100%. Very, very interesting. Develop that donut effect. Hadn't heard that one before. When we had some of the real estate experts on one of our Work Matter series there last year, they talked about how in New York, a lot of, let's say, families moved out to the suburbs and beyond, or to other states. But then a lot of those rents, they were replaced by young people. The rents dropped, but there was a lot of young people that came in to take them. So young millennials and whatnot took advantage of the slightly lower rents to be able to come in. And so now the age demographic of the cities has dropped, certainly in New York anyway. So kind of, again, reflecting that donut effect that you talked about. I'd like to talk to you then, Tim, about, you've got so much experience, managing teams, managing flexibility in work, diversity, inclusion, managing that side of it, be a good employer. Lots of elements to consider there. But maybe at a very, very high level, one of the first ones is just being a good employer and helping people progress. Tell us how you see that. When you're coming into a company, and your own company, how do you see, what does it take to be a good employer? How do you measure that? How do you make sure that becomes a reality? Talk to us through your thinking around that.
I mean, it's very interconnected, I guess. So there's no real quick fix. I think it starts with intentionality, and I know for us, one of the big motivators when we started employing people at Shield was that we didn't want to repeat a lot of the bad experiences that we'd had. A lot of the bad managers that we'd had, or bad company policies that we'd experienced before. And it's not a bad place to start in some respects, because you're trying to be better. And then I think the other thing that's very helpful is so having those sort of that underlying desire to provide a good experience. And then also, I think it helps to be not too tied to sort of the orthodoxy or these frameworks or processes that work for other people, or that are best practice, or what everyone else is doing. Because a lot of what we hear, what we hear about what Facebook is doing, or what we hear about what PwC is doing, or Google, or whatever, some of it isn't actually true. Some of it might be true 5 years ago when the person wrote the book or whatever, but isn't actually true now, or might be true of a tiny part of the organization, but not the rest of it. But also quite a lot of it is very unique to them and their organization and their size and scope. And so that's something we experienced a lot at Shield was, we would say, oh, well, Google do such and such, let's try that. Yeah. And it used to always fail. And so we started instead to try to think more from, high level, where do we want to get to? And then we'll do a whole lot of research trying to work out what other people are doing, what people are saying, what other people have tried. And then we would try and find our own path, which normally was sort of cobbling together bits and pieces of all of that. And that worked pretty well. Worked pretty well for us. And I think it's an approach that can work well, because you're making a whole lot of decisions then about what you want, and talking to people and coming to consensus. And that means you'll end up with sort of that unique recipe that applies to your circumstances.
Well, how would you describe, if somebody was to come on and spend a week with with the Shield team, when you were at the very, very height of it, I guess, how would they describe the culture?
Well, there's what I would like them to describe it as, and then what I would actually describe it as, which might be different. But I think we have I think our values were fairly evident, but particularly I think the most important value, we only had 4, and the most important one for us was be human. So we had a value of own it, which was about taking ownership of your work, and that was very important for us in that remote environment, that we didn't want to chase people. We didn't want to micromanage anybody. And with that, if you own your work, then you also get the flexibility, because if someone could give you a piece of work and you go off and do it, or come back if there's a problem or whatever, then you don't need to know where anyone is or what they're doing, because you can trust that they're going to get it done. But this value of being human for us meant that we were always trying, not always succeeding, but always trying to remember that whether you're typing a message in Slack or in Salesforce or in a video call or whatever else, it's human beings who are at the other end. And the more time that we sort of spent getting to know that person and trying to build a relationship with that person, and recognizing the unique qualities that they have and the uniqueness of our relationship, the better it was. We communicated better. We were more caring towards each other. We were more thoughtful. We, assumed better intent with everybody's actions. The more that we focus on that, it's kind of a lesson we learned the hard way, I think. So that came naturally to some people, and for other people they had to work on it. But I do think that was one of the, I guess, hallmarks of the culture that we built.
So I assume good intent. You often hear that again and again and again in successful remote work organizations. How do you see, Tim, the balance between, on the one hand, people working virtually, working remotely, and on the other hand, being in person is often when you can create the strongest kind of interpersonal connections and glue or whatnot. How did you achieve that? Did you have company meetups? You mentioned that before, on a regular basis. Did you have a whole company-wide company meetup, or did you have departmental or regional company meetups, or how did you help foster that glue? Obviously, you would have had, was it as simple as having, drinks nights, which doesn't always work either at all. Like, how did you use that combination of in-person, and how often did you meet, and also remote work tools or strategies to kind of foster that connection between people, to build that trust?
Well, we only ever had one company retreat. Unfortunately, we were on the cusp of having our second when COVID hit. So we were meant to be in Bali in March, I think it was. No, May.
Oh,
May of 2020. Yeah, got canned. Which was, I remember somebody said to me in May of 2020. They said, we're meant to be in Bali right now doing this conversation in person. And I got a little teary. It was because it's so nice meeting up with people, and particularly, you can build strong bonds and you can have great interaction, but just being, sitting at a table with somebody, having breakfast with them, or sitting on a couch and shooting the breeze is just a beautiful experience. But and you can't quite replace that. But what actually Stella, who was our HR manager, had a really great point, that she said, in person there's things that you can do which you can't do online. but also online, there are things you can do which you can't do in person. And so I think the mistake that people make is trying to sort of replicate it and not actually saying, oh, you know what? We can't get everybody together and go for a coffee or go for a beer or whatever, but we can do things that are actually very different. And so exploring that was really helpful for us, I think.
Tell us more about that, Tim. Very interested. So, remote working and managing remote work teams, what ways did you foster in a remote context that connection, I guess, because you couldn't meet in person? So what things did you do, or what techniques or tools or strategies did you use?
Well, one thing I was always very conscious of was that because we're very distributed globally, we had, I think we got to 70 people in, I can't remember how many, 17 countries, something like that.
Wow.
And so straight off, if I walk out my front door here where I live in Sydney, it's a very, it's a pretty homogenous group of people that I'm confronted with. It's a very Australian sort of setting. And yet there was a period there where my direct reports were in Mumbai, in Johannesburg, in Sydney, in Singapore, in Vancouver. And so straight up, I'm having an experience which I just cannot get. I can't work with that mix of people. I can't experience those day-to-day lives without the experience of working remotely. So that's one example, right? Like, and being conscious of that, understanding that that's a gift, that's a unique and pleasurable experience is important. And then also there are aspects of, we started to play with this a little bit where, we would do online retreats. So, we couldn't do our face-to-face retreat. So instead we started doing every month, we would do a virtual retreat. So it was about an hour. We'd run 2 per month, 12 hours apart so that people could join at a time that was convenient for them. And then we started to play around with this. Like if I want to get to know you, John, and, I don't get the experience of those sort of serendipitous chats that we might have if we were, sat at a beach bar in Phuket. But, perhaps, we play a game where you show me something from your house or you share some memory. And because you're in your home, the context that you're going to bring into that is different.
That's true. Love it. Very personal.
Yeah. And you got to, like, people have got to be into it because they're it could be intrusive. There isn't, some people want to keep their home and work separate. But we did one event where we asked people to bring their most treasured possession that they were comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
And we gave them like 60 seconds. So first of all, it was a lot of fun because everyone gets up from the screen and you see them sort of running around and stuff. But then people brought back, one guy brought his lucky shirt that he'd passed his accounting exams with. Someone else brought, someone brought their wedding dress. So people brought like little trinkets. One person, Kim, brought her mum, who was in the house.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
And they brought the house down. You can imagine the reaction.
Of course. Love it. I just all the different elements of how people think and love it. Absolutely. That's a gem. That's an absolute gem. Great idea.
Yeah, and you can imagine if you're all sitting in a conference room in in some glass tower in the city, or if you're bust out to some paddock where you're trying to work out how to build a raft out of a 44-gallon drum and float it across a lake, like those sort of that corporate setting doesn't necessarily lead to that same sort of degree of connection or sharing.
It definitely doesn't, but I love what you've done there is you've turned a disadvantage into a big advantage. And you still people still need to meet in person. There's no two ways about it. But I love what that story you took as just such a powerful example of something that can be very meaningful, great fun, great crack, great way of connecting everyone and sharing a different side to people's personalities, and their values and what's important to them. So that's great on the culture and managing these teams. But coming back to the management side of it, what about having difficult conversations, Tim? How do you see that? Is that trickier in a remote context? But in general, how do you find having those difficult conversations? Is that something kind of almost tied back to the culture and the not quite radical candor, but the ability to be honest and straight up? But how do you manage that performance and those difficult conversations?
It's a great question. And I guess there are two parts to it. First is I don't think I'm particularly good at it. And that's one of the things that we talked about a little bit over the last year was, companies have values and we talk a lot about what those are, how they surface in a positive context. So our value of be human means, we recognize people, we want to understand what they are, who they are, and all those things. There is a shadow side to all those values. And so for us, that value of being human means that we also find it harder to have conflict. We find it harder to do things that we think might upset people or might be difficult. And so I don't think that's something that we were great at Shield. But when we did it, we tried to do it in a very sort of a caring and empathetic way, which the way I try and think about it, I guess there's a couple of layers. And the first layer is, I want to be able to live with myself afterwards. And that's something that's always been very important for me. And I think, something that resonated with a lot of people within the company is, this idea of, hey, it's just business, that never sat well with me. Because really it's people, right? And I want to be able to look myself in the eye the next day and say, okay, that was tough, that was awkward, that was painful, but I can respect myself in the way that I conducted myself in that conversation. And so that means, being vulnerable, it means telling the truth, it means being reliable and saying what I mean, and doing the things I say I'm going to do. And also, I think in those difficult conversations, if you're able to create a space where you can have that type of interaction with somebody, the conversation actually becomes a lot easier. A lot of the risk and a lot of the sort of the tension, the drama can be reduced as a result of that, because a lot of the time, difficult conversations are difficult because we think, oh, this is going to be tough, and then we get tense, and then we come in with our armor up, and we're ready to protect ourselves or fight or shut down or whatever it is that we're going to do to try and get through it because we're worried about how it's going to go. But if we can approach it with the idea that it might be an awkward conversation, but that we're going to be okay at the end of it, then I think it makes a big difference. And ultimately, I think that helps people if they can see it, if they can sense it.
Yeah.
Then it helps things along. And so, in order to do that, text is bad, video is better. Audio is better than text, but video is better than audio. Yeah. Real time is better than async. Yeah. And so you want to be trying to push conversations towards that richer interaction, because it gives you the best chance, I think, of creating that sort of environment where people can still feel that there is a connection. And I dealt a lot with terminations. For work, I dealt a lot with terminations. I dealt with terminations within Shield, like internally as well. They tended to get escalated to me. And I always viewed it that way, that, I wanted to have those conversations. I wanted to have that conversation in as much detail as the person was able to, as they were willing to do so. Yeah. And what I feel generally, on balance, not every time, but on balance, people would get to a point, whether immediately in the conversation or afterwards, that they could move forward. And ultimately, that's what you want to do. separating employment sort of the ultimate difficult conversation at work, I think. And, so I think that you have an opportunity there to let people say what they need to say and express what they need to express, and then move forward feeling still like a valuable and respected person who just wasn't successful in this particular environment for whatever reason.
Yeah, that crucial, just the balance that you talk about in the empathy, and not easy. Those kind of conversations are never easy, I guess. But like you said, making sure that they feel valued, and that, like you said, maybe they weren't successful in this role, but who knows in the future. But again, coming back to empathy, absolutely critical. Well, I have to say, Tim, really enjoyed the chat today. I feel like only scratched the surface on so many different aspects, and I have to say, really enjoyed it. Massive congratulations on all your success with Shield, and lots of success with Contractor taxation. And thank you so much for coming on board. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And great to see you. Great to catch up.